From GNN, the Global News Network, a division of Totown Communications Company Japan. Japan Journal. With Mal Adams. A Black Buddha Productions joint, of Japan. And now, your host, Malcolm W. Adams.
Feel free to go ahead and open the program, my friend.
Oh, okay. We'll do that. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the February online workshop for ETJ East Tokyo. ETJ stands for English Teachers in Japan. I'm the coordinator. Yuko is a program chair, right? I think that's the title. Anyway, so I have my honor to introduce Mr. Malcolm Adams, and I will read or briefly introduce him. Then afterward, Mal will take over this meeting. So Malcolm W. Adams is a founder, president, and executive producer of Totown Communication Group Japan. A native of Omaha, Nebraska, USA, Adams reside in Kakegawa City, Shizuoka Prefecture. He has had an illustrious career as a TV and a radio news correspondent for more than 50 years. That's a long time. Among his group of small businesses is Adams International Academy, AIA, where he's the owner and the chief instructor in English and Japanese languages. He first came to Japan in 1976 as a news anchor from KNX News Radio, the CBS flagship station in Los Angeles. In 1981, he became the TV and radio correspondent for the Tokyo Bureau of CBS News. In 1984, Adams helped launch the CNN Tokyo Bureau with a weekly series called This Week in Japan. He was a producer, correspondent, and the host of the program on the new worldwide CNN Global News Network. That's Mal Adams. So here's the show, Mal.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nikki, for that introduction. And thank all of our viewers and subscribers for joining us on this broadcast, which will be posted on my YouTube channel and on my Facebook for our subscribers there. So allow me to kick the program off and welcome all of you. Good evening and welcome to another edition of Japan Journal. I'm your host, Mal Adams, on the internet's #1 weekly English language online cybercast, Japan Journal. Welcome to our special program commemorating Black History Month 2023. Tonight, we're going to talk about teaching of English in Japan specifically, but teaching in general here from a cross-cultural perspective with a focus on the experiences of African-American educators. Joining me today are three distinguished guests, Dr. Reginald Kearney, Professor Michael Williams, and educator Kathy Bauer. I'd like to welcome our special guests to the program. Let me test your mic. Dr. Kearney, welcome.
Pleased to be here.
And Professor Kathy, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Thank you. My pleasure as well. And Professor Michael Williams, good to have you, my friend.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so let's get on with the show. By the way, Nikki, let me go back to you, if you will, and for our broad viewers on the Japan Journal program, just a word about ETJ. How would you describe this organization for our listeners around the world?
Okay, ETJ, as I said, I could have said it, stands for English Teachers in Japan. And it's a nonprofit organization mostly for elementary school teachers. Some are college professors. And let me see. In terms of membership, ETJ could be the largest organization in Japan. After that, this could be a JALT, J-A-L-T, and there are some other organization, but we are the largest nonprofit organization. Pretty casual. Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you very much for asking me to do this program. There was a schedule conflict. I was scheduled to do this regular Japan Journal broadcast, but we decided with your collaboration to actually feature our show on your platform. And we're looking forward to seeing many English teachers in Japan to join us in our discussion toward the end of this presentation. So without any further ado, allow me to introduce Ms. Bauer first. Please, could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to teach in Japan? Then we'll go to Professor Williams and Dr. Kearney, please. Those.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me on your show today. And thank you, ETJ, for allowing us to piggyback on your weekly time slot. My name is Kathy Bauer. I hail from Chicago, Illinois, a small town just outside of Chicago. I've been in Japan for over 20 years. I've taught in every aspect of English as a second language in Japan throughout those years. I came here after I graduated university on a Bachelor of Arts degree, and I was recruited actually before I graduated through a small company, and I came here with a Japanese husband. And after I arrived in Japan, there of course was a lot of adjustments, and culture shock was of course always a thing. But I really have enjoyed the process of honing the skill of becoming an educator. I come from a family of educators. My mother is a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher until her last day. My aunts are both educators and administrators in the educational system in Chicago and on the East Coast. As I said, I've taught in every aspect. At this time, I'm teaching at the secondary English instructor level, and I am an academic supervisor and head instructor at a private international high school.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. And I appreciate, this is our first time working together. I appreciate the introduction which was given to me by our next presenter, Professor Michael Williams of the Temple University Japan campus in Tokyo. Professor, if you will, please introduce yourself along the same lines, your background, where you're from, and what are you involved in currently, please.
Thank you, Mel, and thank EJT for inviting me to the program today. My name is Michael Williams, and as Mal Adams said, I teach at Temple University, Japan. I'm originally from the state of Alabama, Birmingham, and I graduated Alabama State University. And upon graduation, I entered the U.S. Peace Corps and served as an English language teacher in South Korea for 2 years. After that, I taught on the U.S. military bases for 1 year before coming to Japan in 1980. I first arrived in Japan in 1980 as an English teacher working for Time Life Educational Systems. And then Temple University opened up in 1982, and I began teaching there in the language program and in the undergraduate program. Currently, I'm teaching courses in African American history, such as Politics of Identity in America, African American history up to 1865, African American history 1865 to the present, exploring identity through hip hop, and as well as other courses.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. And allow me to mention here that Mike Williams and I go back 40 years or so.
Wow.
As I do with Mr. Sekino, Nikki.
Mhm.
And so we're all brothers in this experience for many, many years, a few decades, and it's an honor to have us together again on this Black History Month commemorative program. And so that leads us to our senior member here, my new big brother, Dr. Reginald Kearney. Just enjoy exchanging with him on a wide range of topics related to the Black experience in Japan. He's a published author, and I'll let him pick it up there. Dr. Kearney, how did you end up give us your general experience even before Japan, please, sir.
Well, I first came to Japan with the United States Marine Corps. I came to Okinawa, actually. Marine Corps only allowed me to be here 15 months, and I liked it well enough that I asked to extend. The powers that be said no, and therefore I made the decision that I would get out and try to return to East Asia. And I thought that I want to be able to do what I wanted to do for as long as I wanted to do it. And I thought it would be best to have a college education. So I enrolled at Morgan State College, a historically Black college. My intention was to get the bachelor's degree and come back to Japan, but the president of that particular college and the professors suggested strongly that if you had the potential, go on to graduate school. And so I went from Morgan State to University of Sri Lanka for 1 year.
Ooh.
And I enrolled at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. There I majored in the history of Japan. My intention was to study everything that I could about Japan. And I came from Hawaii to the International Christian University in Tokyo. Did 2.5 years there, went back to university. Actually, George Akita, one of my most esteemed professors, came and brought me back basically to finish work on my master's. And then I went on to Kent State University to pursue the doctorate. I finally did get back to Japan in, what year was that? Well, after ICU, I came back in 78. I was here for a year studying at the Inter-University Center for Japanese Language Studies. Went back to the States. Came back, well, I'll say the last time I came back, it was in 92. And whoops, no, I was going to say 92, I came back. I taught at Obiden University and Kanda Gaigo Daigaku in Chiba. Then I went back to the States, came back the last time in 99, and that was with the University of Maryland Asia Division. And they sent me to teach on different bases, but I've been a resident of Okinawa since the year 2000. I taught African-American history, Japanese history, and sometimes Chinese history, as well as American history. And I think that's about enough of an introduction, unless you have some specific question.
Yes, I do.
Well, let me say,
publications. Talk about your books that are on sale now and available now, if you would.
Well, African American Views of the Japanese Solidarity or Sedition is the book that I've written. And
Brother Mike is featuring your book in his square there if you want to take a look.
thank you very much.
See,
I found someone who bought it.
I'm on autopilot here with my participants. We got screen sharing going on as you speak. Go ahead.
And then Nijuseki no Nihonjin, America Kokujin no Nihonjin Kam is a version that was translated by a good friend of mine. And did a monograph for the Japan Society, but mostly I've written articles like the first Japanese embassy to go to the United States and a reaction to it. W.E. Du Bois, pro-Japanese utterances, and let me see. Well, there's quite a few of those. So.
Okay, and thank you very much for sharing those with us. We'll see that your bibliography and your books and all of that will be published when I republish this program at the end. Thank you so much. Eminently qualified, all of our guests here, and it's a pleasure for me to be able to host this show. The least eminently qualified of all. But since it is the African-American experience in Japan through education, I would be remiss if I did not allow my new friend, Yuko-san, Kikuchi-san, to shitokoto onegaishimasu. Just give a brief introduction of yourself and your experience in English language education, if you will, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Yuko Kikuchi. I am Japanese. I was born in Japan and brought up in Japan. And I started teaching English a long time ago. And I've never lived or studied in an English-speaking country. So most of my English was picked up here in Japan. And I thought my first students were young children. At that time, I thought teaching kids would be very, very easy. But actually, it wasn't. It's much, much more difficult. And I've been learning how to teach kids or sometimes junior high and adults. And I'm really enjoying, actually now. Long time ago, I was struggling, but now I think I can enjoy teaching English here in Japan.
I see. Okay. Great. I'm so happy. Please allow us to include your input. It was not planned this way, but I think you're going to be able to contribute an important aspect of this overall discussion. So please stand by. Now, we have two other people who are on board with us here today. Please, my eyes. Namiko-san, please open your mic and introduce yourself.
Hello.
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 My name is
Welcome.
Namiko.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
I'm a Japanese returnee. So at the age of 5, we moved to the States. So I've mostly been educated in the States on the East Coast. I went to school mostly in Connecticut. I went to U of M at Michigan in Ann Arbor and majored in psychology and was a preschool teacher. And there I met some Japanese students, and I realized that I wanted to understand my identity more because I grew up in the States. And so in order to get back to my roots, I returned to Japan in 1998 to teach English. And I've been doing that since. And luckily, I met ETJ, met Nikki, Yuko-san, and it's been quite a journey these past 30 years. But I think understanding your own identity really does help you see like the bigger picture. And especially as educators here in Japan, I think it is really important to not just understand who you are, but also the learners in our context and hopefully empower them with English. So really nice to meet all of you.
Wow. A pleasure to have you. Unexpected surprise, Nikki. this is working out to be something very interesting. And so we have one more person on the name is Queenie. She says Batsu.
Why?
Okay, you don't have to comment. Feel free to just observe. But if you like, please.
Okay. It is nice to be back here. Nice to see you again, Namiko-chan, Yuko-san, and Nikki.
Okay.
And new faces like, what's his name? Malcolm.
Okay,
And
yes.
I've seen you on YouTube.
Oh, really?
Oh my God.
Yeah, and you play the piano, and
Oh my
I
God.
didn't hear it. You are a musician or something?
Musician?
Yeah.
No.
Are you?
I'm an autodidact piano student, self-taught piano student as a hobby. I'm
Wow.
involved in the music business. I have a record label, but and I manage and represent several African American artists who live in Japan. But that's the extent of my skill in music. I'm a business guy. So
Wow.
thank you very much. And where are you from again, please? And what's your role with regard to?
I'm from my mother. Oh, I'm sorry. No, of course, all of us are from our mother.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
I'm from the island of the Philippines.
Very good.
And my English is not good as you. How about Yuko-san's English is quite very good.
Yeah.
Even though she didn't go abroad or in some English countries, and Nikki too. And Namiko, well, Namiko is come again here. Anyway, nice to meet you all. I have nothing much to say. I'm getting, my heart is young, but my body says I'm 90.
Okay, very good. Congratulations.
Anyway,
All right.
okay, let's proceed. I have nothing much to say. I'm just.
Thank you very much for what you've shared with us. Thank you very much. So let's move on here with some talking points that I created that will apply, particularly given the background of our participants right now. It's looking like it will be more relevant now that we have two extra contributors that were not scheduled. But allow me to talk about in general terms. And you may or may not agree with these principles, but I'll share them as talking points and we can individually bounce off these points. Generally, the teaching of English language in Japan from a cross-cultural perspective requires an understanding of the unique cultural and linguistic characteristics of Japan, as well as the ways in which they may affect English language learning and teaching. Here are some key points that I thought we might consider. Number one, English proficiency levels in Japan. While English is taught in schools in Japan, the country has historically struggled with low levels of English proficiency among its population. This can be attributed in part to cultural factors such as a focus on rote memorization and a reluctance to speak out in class, which may not align with communicative language teaching approaches. Number two, cultural differences. Japan has a distinct cultural identity, which can influence how English language learners approach the language. For example, the Japanese language and writing system are vastly different from English, which may pose challenges for learners in terms of grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. Number three, importance of cultural awareness. Teaching English in Japan requires a focus on intercultural communication and the development of intercultural competence. This includes an understanding of Japanese culture and values, as well as an appreciation for the diversity of cultural backgrounds of English learners in Japan. Number four, the use of technology. This could be an interesting topic. In recent years, technology has played an increasingly important role in English language teaching in Japan. This includes the use of online resources, multimedia tools, and language learning apps, which can provide opportunities for cross-cultural exchange and collaboration. And finally, the importance of communication skills. As the focus of English language learning in Japan shifts towards more communicative approaches, it is important to emphasize the development of speaking and listening skills. This may involve the use of role-playing and real-life scenarios, as well as opportunities for English learners to interact with native speakers of English. So overall, teaching English in Japan from a cross-cultural perspective requires an understanding of the cultural and linguistic factors that influence language learning and teaching in Japan, as well as an awareness of the importance of intercultural communication and the development of intercultural competence. So with that, I know you don't have any talking points before you, any notes, but I would like to go to educator Ms. Bauer for opening comments to share a little bit about your teaching method without giving away too many of your trade secrets. Okay, but generally in this context, the aspects of cross-cultural communication awareness in the work that you do currently and over the years. Please, the floor is yours. Excuse me.
Thank you very much, and thank you for going through the talking points. It's been my experience over the years from teaching students from the age of 0 to 75 and above that language learners are much the same as language learners in Japan are much the same as language learners in any other country. The human mind is generally wired the same across the planet. And we as sapiens are able to absorb knowledge at different stages in our development. When we're younger, we're able to absorb information a lot more readily than we become older. But we can, of course, develop our skills a little bit differently as we grow older. And as far as these talking points are concerned, proficiency levels in Japan being a little bit less overall, I would attribute those things not necessarily to a lack of, not necessarily to mainly them being focused on memorization, but methodology, as you pointed out, of teaching. Every child, every person in the womb, as we are born, we are listening to our mother's voice. When we're born, we have the sound of the native person's voice in our ear. We don't speak it though. So it begins with listening. Once we get our ears accustomed to those types of sounds, we can reproduce it when we're ready, when our brains are ready to do that. Japan as a nation was closed for 400 years. Those of you that teach English, those of you that teach Japanese history know that the nation was a closed off island nation. And so, of course, they keep things close to their chest and they enjoy the invisible wall of their cultural identity, which is respectable. But on the other side of that wall, they want, or they have expressed a need to become more globalized, right? So those two dynamics are not necessarily in line with each other. We want to become more globalized because our nation is in statistical decline because everyone is aging. We don't have enough workforce. We need to have our people either develop more skills or have more people enter into our society. On that note, as I said, I would say that our way of teaching young people to absorb language is key. And the older generation that are starting to acknowledge and recognize that they're going to have to change their skill set or learn something new, they're going to have to overcome a lot of the fears of allowing the different cultures into their reality. So a lot of those fears that they had from their youth, from their childhood, you shouldn't accept other things that are different, things that are new, things that are unusual into your experience. They are going to have to come to the realization that those things are inevitable. change is going to come whether or not they're ready. Sorry, I kind of covered a lot of things there.
Well, you did, and it's appropriate because this is an umbrella, the talking points particularly, but something stuck out that I'd like you to expand on.
Okay.
And it was the talking about the rote memorization. Let me see if I can review it. It says that English proficiency levels in Japan, that Japan historically struggled with levels of proficiency in its population, and this can be attributed, excuse me, in part to cultural factors. So I'd like you to speak on cultural factors as it affects the learning capability, such as focus on rote memorization and reluctance to speak out in class. Two things that I'm aware of as an English instructor in my own school. Could you address that phenomenon that may be driven by cultural aspects, if you get my drift? Okay,
sure.
Please.
When we talk about rote memorization, we're talking about the skills that students are asked to develop in learning kanji and math. There are thousands of kanji that they need to practice when they're from elementary school all the way through high school. They need to have the proficiency, they need to have the repetition, the muscle memory in order to write the kanji, in order to memorize how to read and recognize different sayings of the kanji that are in the language of their native language. That is where the rote memorization comes, as well as math, of course, and academia and other science concepts and things. Where it comes to alternate languages, Kaigai, another language, that isn't necessarily something that they are accustomed to overlaying that, because there are historically not many teachers on the island that are proficient enough to be able to provide that experience for them. Not that they are not capable of it, but when we as native speakers, some of us as native speakers, growing up in elementary school, we remember our ABCs through music. We remember our times tables through a system of memorizing techniques. So it's not so unusual. Rote memorization is not unique to Japan. It's just what we are memorizing, right? So we do memorize things in America as well. Then we're expected to know these things automatically. From a cultural perspective, I would say that it begins in the home, right? So whenever somebody is speaking a language that is not necessarily their mother tongue, the societal reaction to that would, in general, be something apprehensive. And in terms of its acceptance, right? It's not necessarily something that we would normally see, simply because it's unfamiliar or they're not proficient in it enough to feel comfortable with someone else expressing themselves in another language. Not that they're not capable of it, but they're not proficient enough to feel confident to be able to interact in that manner. Culturally speaking, since that is a prevalent hesitation or apprehension, I feel that the elders that have the pervasiveness of that hesitation and pass that down to the younger generation, that is what carries over. And they don't learn that it is acceptable to make mistakes. They don't feel that it is okay to trip over a grammar mistake or a misused vocabulary word. They don't feel that it's acceptable for them to step out of a sentence structure or any type of usage of the language. Whereas in Japanese society, it's okay to kind of joke around and make a mistake using the Japanese language because we can understand each other even if we make a mistake, right? So I think there's
amazing. That is so, you're so smart. Thank you very much. And one more follow-up question, if I may, since we're on the subject, and I'd like Yuko to participate because it's a natural transfer to your abilities as a proficient speaker and an educator who is not a native speaker. I'll get to that in a minute. But first, in response to my question about the cultural implications regarding reticence or rote memorization, two buzzwords, what have you done as someone who's created your own curriculum? And I see in your bio that you do devise curriculum. Without revealing your secrets, I know it's a business. I'm not going to share all my techniques either, but we can talk about it. What have you done specifically, 3 points, to address those things that you just so brilliantly identified? Because I know everybody here feels what you are saying. Those are.
That question is for me?
Yes, ma'am. It's your, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
Don't go through that, but any tips you can, because I'm talking to our listeners now who are English teachers in Japan for the most part, and from the broad scale, non-native Japanese speakers, although we do speak, teaching language and other things in a country not of our own. You know what I'm saying? It goes both ways. So those are, I particularly was moved by the part about they're okay to joke and use slang and idioms in their own language, but when it comes to me, I teach them slang in my own courses just to get that feeling and that communicative device going.
It doesn't transfer the same.
Okay, I know it, but
yeah.
They can learn it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So to your point, in my experience, when I've been asked to do consultations for different facilities in the past, and I've been commissioned to visit different facilities and design their curriculum and train their instructors on how to organize their classrooms and how to instruct the teachers on how to organize and manage the classrooms and divide up the students and things like that. What I can tell you the main thing, as soon as I walk into a facility, I can observe the atmosphere and what is it that the students are visibly experiencing. What is it that they're surrounded by? What is it that they're hearing and seeing on a daily basis? If a child, young or older, is surrounded by an atmosphere or an environment that is not necessarily welcome, I wouldn't say hostile, but not as academically inclined for their learning potential. If you hear a lot of Japanese in the background, or if you hear a lot of conflict in the background, in the office, in earshot, if you hear chastisement to students, to other teachers, in front of young people, in front of students, things that imagine an academic facility as a home. Now, what kind of home would you feel comfortable staying in and entering and learning in? If you enter a facility that is not, that doesn't have that sense of welcome, you can grow here. You're probably going to have a hard time developing. The second thing that I observe when I go into a facility to see what issues need to be addressed is how the material that the students are being introduced to is organized. How much material is being disseminated to them, and through what methods, right? And through what means the information is being given to them. Is it auditory? Is it what's that, visual? Is it manipulative? Not necessarily role play. So again, this is on different levels. I'm not talking about role play. Role play it involves a lot of different skills. right? So we need reading, we need comprehension, we need speaking, we need response, call and response ability, those cues that need to be able to be recognized before we can get to a role play space. I'm talking about simply from a cultural perspective. When you enter a facility and you see that the curriculum is overwhelming to a student, they're not going to be able to absorb it. You'll have to be able to recognize what percentage of any type of material you introduce to a class or individual is appropriate for that person or classroom group. And that takes a lot of skill and talent. It doesn't matter what textbook you use. Textbooks are just tools. It is up to the instructor to be able to dissect that information that an academic has scribbled on a textbook page, and these are the different units, these are the different items that they should know by this time. These are ideal points, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to transfer to the students, right? So that's how to teach you to discern. And the final thing that I would say, sorry, I know I'm running a little bit long. The final thing I would say is to understand your audience. Don't talk over your student's head and don't patronize. Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you so much. Great. I like the way this is flowing. I'm going to come to Yuko-san on the cultural aspects and also a little bit about someone who is proficient in the language and the teaching of it based on your experience, who is a non-native speaker and a Japanese native. Then I'm going to go to Professor Michael Williams about the diversity in the many classes that you teach at Temple University that must be just rife with all kinds of cultural implications. Think about that as we go to Yuko-san for your response to what Educator Bauer has just shared with us. Dozo, please.
Okay, it'll be.
Let me narrow the point about. I'd like you to address the aspects of the cultural implications. We talked about rote memorization and we talked about reticence or reluctance to speak out in class. You must know about that. You must recognize that. How do you deal with that? And as a Japanese person dealing with Japanese students, deal with that.
Yeah,
please.
I still feel that my students feel some fear to speak up in front of a class. And actually, yesterday I had 2 new students in my class, kids class. And so I decided to do some very easy and warm up.
Yes.
Which is, I had 4 students and we sit on the tatami floor and I rolled a ball to them and said, hi, dare dare. And they will do the same and hi, Yuko. And this kind of very easy and I thought everybody can enjoy it because they have to produce, all they have to produce is hi, dare dare, name.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the new girls was very, very shy and couldn't produce or articulate in English. And what I heard from their parents, their father, they've learned English since they were 2 or 3 by some sort of video or DVD style English. And the father said they had a lot of English exposure, but I guess speaking up in that kind of atmosphere was very, very fearful for that girl. And I think I can understand that. So what I do is actually I ask them I let them speak out in activities, like very not so tense, but relaxed atmosphere. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. I appreciate that contribution. Professor Williams, at your environment, you're at the University of Temple University, Japan campus, and in our previous discussions, I was impressed by the fact that you're dealing with a great diversity within your own class population. Could you speak to the need for awareness of cultural differences within the same class environment, and share with us the description of what your typical class might be at Temple, please?
Yes, that's a very interesting question, because at TUJ, we have students from all over the world. And there's, I think, students from 48 different countries. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. I got a little thing that says your internet is unstable.
Okay. Yeah. I'll let you know if we need you to repeat something. Go ahead.
Good. As I said, we have students, I think, from 48 different countries. And it presents a problem in the classroom because sometimes students who don't speak I receive complaints from other students, and particularly Asian students. Well, not students from the Philippines. They often speak. Queenie, you said you're from the Philippines, but students from other Asian countries like China, for example, are very reluctant to speak out. And I get students coming to me and saying, well, I don't want to be in this group discussion because X or Y and Z, they don't say anything. And so I have to change the groups to allow for students who want to talk to talk. It is a very difficult problem. I think what the school is trying to do to meet this issue, it's not just in my class, it's across the curriculum and the number of different courses, is to offer an orientation to students to explain to them these are the kinds of things you can do in order to participate in a discussion. Because many of the students, I think, don't know that. And one of those things I think Kathy hit on is having a comfortable environment. And so the thing is, for the environment during this orientation, they have to say, feel comfortable. If you don't feel comfortable, then you can ask your teacher or to change this or to change something else. And then maybe you will feel that you can participate at your level wherever you want to. The other issue, if I may, is some feel their pronunciation gets in the way of trying to communicate, particularly Japanese students. And I found one of the reasons behind that, one of the reasons I think is behind that, is what I call katakana English.
Yeah.
For example, hot dog. And so I would ask the students, erase that part and erase that part. Now say that. And then they say, oh, it says hot dog. See, you don't need the goo and do. So I think to show them that sometimes the culture here, I think, impedes the students from creating a unique way to improve their pronunciation. I think they are so set in the way that this is how it's done. It's written this way. We learned it this way throughout our education. And therefore, any change might go against the grain. But that impedes progress on improving the pronunciation, I believe.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'd like to spend more time with you, but we're going to move it around here. Two new things have now come to mind. First of all, Dr. Kearney, I'm coming to you soon, not necessarily with a specific question, but if you have any questions for our participants, and then I'd like you to respond to what you've heard so far. But first, Michael just give me a notion here. I need to talk to Nikki and Mamiko, is it?
Yeah.
Namiko-san.
Namiko-san, yeah.
Please open your mic, Namiko. I have a question for you.
Yes, please. Ask away.
Okay. In my own curriculum, as Michael just talked about, katakana hatsuon of English. I deal with it all the time, and it's functional. It's very useful to show a student the difference. Stop putting the vowel at the end of the word. It ain't biru, it's beer. The ER, AR, OR ending is problematic.
Mhm.
What's your particular, from your personal, you were born and raised where now?
I was born actually down south. So I was born in Fukuoka, and then I lived
But
in
when you, I'm sorry, when you said down south, I'm thinking, oh, Alabama? No,
not Alabama, yeah,
no,
not
you're born in Japan.
yeah,
You're born
Japan. Yeah, I was born in Kyushu.
down south. Okay, gotcha.
So down south. Yeah,
Accurate. I say down south too.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But we moved to a very, very small town in Connecticut where
Wow.
most of the population, I mean, we could count how many Japanese were there. I mean, Reagan was just inaugurated. It was like the late 1970s.
Were there any black folks there?
Yes, only one.
Yeah.
Only one. Yep.
All right.
Yep. And they had to
But
create an ESL program for us. There was no such program at that time. So second language acquisition was not at its peak at all. So even
how
yeah,
old were you when you went to Connecticut?
I think I was 5. So I had just finished my second year of kindergarten
Mhm.
and
I
then
see.
States. Yeah.
Same generation. So were you friends with
What?
the one black?
What's smart?
Were you
Again?
friends with the one black kid there?
Actually, he lived in my neighborhood. So we actually hung out. So this is very interesting because even though I grew up in the States, we often talk about the melting pot and diversity. But at that time, because I lived in a mostly like white neighborhood, and also it was middle upper class. Yeah, it was a very different upbringing. I actually tell my friends here that I kind of led the expat life because my father was also a businessman, and that was the reason why we all moved to the States in the first place. And then I went to college preparatory school, and then ended up at a Big Ten university. So yeah, it was a very
So
untypical life. Yeah.
so what? At what point did you return?
So actually, when I was at University of Michigan, I was taking just a variety of classes. Yeah, actually, Malcolm, I was a piano performance major.
Whoa.
So I thought I was going to be, a concert pianist. But then,
You got something in common with Kathy. She's
oh
a
really?
diva, an opera diva,
Oh,
soprano, and a
oh
I
pianist.
wow!
actually got my degree in
No way!
classical music and
Oh my God!
opera theater.
Really? Well, many of my friends are opera singers and conductors and musicians. Yeah, yeah. We should have a separate talk next time.
Yeah,
Um,
but we're not going to talk opera or classical. I'm talking about the 1 4 5, some blues,
oh,
C
that's
to the E.
cool.
No, sheet
I'm
music, yeah.
down with those the imbued with the blues jazz progressions, but I digress. What I
Yeah,
really want to hear
but
from you
actually,
is
Malcolm, that's a really good point because I was a music major, and actually, when I do my presentations about second language learning, or especially in Japan, it's not ESL, but it's EFL, so English as a foreign language. I often do talks about how I learned the language, and I think my
that's what
first
I'm
language, of
going to dig
course,
up for
was
you.
Japanese, but I think my second language wasn't English; it was music. So music
Oh,
helped
I
me.
love to hear that. That's
Yeah, yeah.
nice.
Music really
Understood.
well, music is an international language, so
Oh no,
I use it in my classrooms. I
that's
believe
cool.
strongly in the drama method. Malcolm, you use role plays. I use them as well. But I think the katakana is actually very interesting because thanks
Yeah,
to
that's what I want you to address.
yeah,
Let me interrupt here. Let me nuance the question a little bit
yeah.
by asking you, since you're born and raised until 5 years old in Japan, then went there and acquired all this English. What's your native tongue? And to what extent did you maintain your Japanese language in the household and maintain your cultural nuances? Talk about that, please. And how did that affect your learning or interrupt with your learning of English? On the reverse tip, those are.
Well, first, this is something that I want to kind of demystify because I think there's a myth that
Okay.
language is easy. I think it's completely false. You have to work at it. And I think, as Kathy mentioned, what we're looking at with our learners in this specific context is that they are learning English as a foreign language. However, with the Ministry of Education, what their expectations are is English as a second language. So there's a huge gap. Not only that, but we have some systematic issues where I think Kathy mentioned the textbooks. Yes, textbooks are only a tool for communication. However, teachers sometimes feel bounded by it because the Ministry of Education says, and we do have actually mixed approved textbooks that teachers must use. And of course, they're confused as well because they think they have to use it page by page, which is wholly not true. And you can talk to any of the SLA experts and they'll say the same thing. But what we have to really do is provide that like in-service training for teachers, especially the new teachers. And then the other problem is with katakana English too, is that we think that katakana English actually is a deficit, but it isn't, because in fact, the first like 3,000 words that kids actually need to know to learn the English language, mostly they're loan words. Yeah, thank you, Temple University. Yeah,
Guide
yeah.
Let me pause here so we don't lose our listeners from abroad who are monolingual. They speak whatever the county that they're in and whatever state they're in. They've got. Well, that's why I know I'm coming to you from Shizuoka, Kakegawa City.
Oh, wonderful!
And I've mastered Inshuben.
Wow.
Namonde. That's a Japanese dialect, a Japanese Hoge. So I'm having fun with that by relating to my native Japanese friends and partners, but some other Japanese, someone who studied Japanese abroad maybe wouldn't understand a word that we're talking about, So explain katakana. What is it to our unaware listeners abroad, in our English listeners?
Well, it's interesting.
And why could it interfere, as Professor Michael pointed out, with acquiring language pronunciation, proficiency, those are.
Well, the thing about katakana actually in Japanese is if you don't include English words, Japanese katakana is actually closer to other foreign words. Yeah.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
So it's only the English words that we tend to kind of like add that extra vowel sound at the end. But for example, if we say, like in English, we say Paris, right? Paris, France. But in Japanese, it's Paris.
Paris.
Yeah, and then in French, it's Paris, right?
Yeah.
So actually, it's closer. So there are a lot of English words that actually, when we say it in katakana, it sounds really unnatural. But in other foreign languages, actually, our katakana is very close.
Accurate. It's accurate. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's that misunderstanding there. And then when I think about my American friends, they often say like Tokyo, or they say like Shinagawa, right? So I often use L1. So L1 here would be Japanese, and then L2 would be English, right? The first and second
L1,
language.
L2 means first language, second language.
First language, second language. So I often use both because I am bilingual. So I'll use both to create the distinction, but also the association. That's what we can do, right? That's our job, actually, because with our knowledge of culture, with our knowledge of language background, SLA knowledge, I think our job as educators and as facilitators in the classroom is to give students more practice time to speak and experiment using English. That's what I did as a child when I was little. It took me maybe 5 or 6 years of extensive reading, which was not promoted at my school, but I did it myself as self-study. Went through all the Judy Blume books, all the, who was the other one? The wonderful authors. But through reading, through watching television, sitcoms, listening to music, MTV was really big in the 80s, right? Listening to all those sounds, I call them sounds. Listening to those sounds then helped me build the confidence. And then, of course, I was singing too. I was taking a lot of music classes when I was little too. And singing all these English songs really helped me distinguish the different sounds. And then speaking Japanese at home, because with my parents, I was speaking mostly in Japanese. I could distinguish what sounds were
Yeah, just speak on that a little bit. What was
yeah.
your at-home communication was primarily Japanese?
Yeah, and it's actually kind of funny because my father told my mother not to speak English because he didn't want her, quote, tainting my English. But but you know, like we learn in bilingualism that actually whatever minority language is not supported, you know, in the outside world, you should be speaking in the home. So actually he did it right. I mean, you know, it was okay to do the Japanese. However, Japanese kind of became my heritage language because the pressures of having to, you know, speak English because the majority of them were monolinguals. So unfortunately, there was no bilingual language program that could have actually benefited me and helped me become, you know, a balanced bilingual. So
Okay,
yeah,
this is a personal question. What would you advise my daughter, my firstborn, whose mother is Japanese and whose children are 3/4 Japanese and 1/4 African American? My grandkids, raised up in Orange County, California, whose daddy is first generation Japanese, went there, and whose mom is my daughter. And I'm worried that maybe they lost their Japanese by their high school. One is college age right now. Anything to reflect or share about that?
I always say to my students, don't worry about the English. Do what you enjoy doing in life first.
Hmm.
Part of the problem, I think, with our, you know, the younger generation and with the students that I, you know, worked with for many years, um, I find that those that have passion and interest and curiosity in pursuing something, those are the ones that will use English and then make something of themselves. But unfortunately, at schools, English is just a subject. That's why recently with methodology, we're talking more about CLIL. We're talking more about content, language, and integrated learning. We're talking more about task-based learning, where the grammar comes last, language awareness comes last.
Sure.
And then you're experimenting with the language by providing them situations where they have to use their prior knowledge. Those kinds of things I think are going to help learners become more used to using English and then understanding its function. Because if we think about language and language competency, it's not just about speaking English. There are social linguistics factors also involved. So if we think about that, and also recently, especially like in SLA, world Englishes is really a really big topic. Global English, native speakerism is often like presented at, you know, the university levels. So it's no longer about who speaks native English. It's more about who you use it with. And then with our learners here, contextually, most of the speakers are non-natives. Non-natives are speaking English to one another. So unless you're going to an inner circle, another country that, you know, majority wise they speak English, they're never going to encounter that native Englishness anyway. So through our virtual programs, we have virtual meets with Japanese learners, Taiwanese learners, and Nepalese learners. And you realize, well, yeah, you don't understand what the Nepali students are saying because you're not used to the sounds. You're not used to hearing how they speak.
Mm.
It's a thing with, like, you know, I remember meeting my first Irish friend in Japan and not understanding anything he said because he's from Dublin, you know?
Mm.
Unless you have those, unless you meet people, unless you interact with them, and unless you have these, like, you know, meaningful conversations 2 3 hours at a time where you're immersing yourself in their language, in their English, I think it's going to be difficult for any learner to say, this is the English that I understand. And especially these days, no one says talk like a native speaker. We would never say that to our students
Yeah.
because,
What needed?
yeah, what is that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I got a
Thanks so
little.
much. I really appreciate that
Yeah, no,
contribution. Dr. Kearney, thank you for being patient, my friend. You've heard a lot, and I bet you have questions. Feel free to pose any questions to any of our participants. But first of all, let me have your comments overall. What are your reactions? And share experiences based on what you've heard so far.
Well, actually, I don't have a lot of questions because I think that each of the contributors thus far have basically it said the kinds of things that I was trying to say when we had our practice session.
Sure. Yeah.
That the reality is that students in Japan who are unable to become proficient in the use of English, it really isn't their fault. It's they, first of all, they're not motivated to speak the language. Their parents don't speak the language. Their friends don't speak the language. They see no value, no immediate gratification
Sure.
in the use of the language. That they're, and then I said the other day that from top down, meaning the Mombusho, Kagakusho, they say English is important, but they don't do the kinds of things that these ladies have suggested should be done.
Right.
That you have a situation where they say English is important, but students do not give the same kind of attention to the study of English as they do to the many different sports that all of the schools have. Every school in Japan has a multiplicity of sports clubs.
Right.
They do not spend anywhere near a fraction of the time studying English that they spend studying Japanese. And the other day I said that in Okinawa they had a program that was very well set up. They had competent people to teach. They had all kinds of programs. They started with speaking. They introduced the writing. You had students writing plays or skits. They were performing in those skits. The prefecture for a period of time supported it, and then all of a sudden they didn't. And so the program went kaput. Actually, as the ladies were speaking, I thought perhaps they should be organizing Japan's English programs for the schools.
I'll send this video to the Mombusho when we get done.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah, because go ahead.
They're doing the same thing. I mean, it's almost like if you bang your head up against a wall, after a while, you're supposed to get the idea that maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah, right.
And this has been a perennial problem with the teaching of Japanese. Now, I've had classes from Hoikuren to high school businesses, and I've seen how students can become, for example, one time I was teaching at Toshiba. In the beginning, they had one of these programs where you had the companies paying for these classes.
Yeah.
The class began with 36 students. At the end, there were 6.
I
But
know
the
that.
city stayed. They were speaking English. We were having conversations. But the others, you couldn't even pay them or pay for the lessons and have them attend. And then, like Kuchi-san, I had a student who never went out of Japan, but she was proficient in English. I have a student, well, he says I'm his adopted grandfather, but the man has been with me since he was a junior high school student. And English is one of the 4 languages he speaks. So there, and we know that for students who go to the States, for students who go to American, even Christian schools, they come out speaking English.
Right.
So the people at the Mambusho are supposed to be in charge of English. They need to do something different.
Let me
And
just
I-
interject a personal thing right here. I was hired by the Kyoiku Inkai of Iwata near my village out here. And as a Nihongo oshete kudasai, Yuko-san, nani, Kenshu sensei, teacher of teachers. I was instructed and hired to teach the what's the word I'm looking for you? Homeroom teacher?
Yeah, homeroom teachers.
The homeroom teacher, but in Japanese, what's the word?
担任の先生。
Huh?
担任の先生。
So, Tani no sensei were all my students. And I would spend the month going around from different elementary and junior high schools to teach as many as 90 students at a time in a seminar. And I had 2 or 3 other ALTs, which I would never agree to be because ALT is misused. They're roboto hatsun yatsudachi for, and the sensei, my first lesson was don't run to the back of the room when your ALTs up in the front interacting with your kids. You need to demonstrate something psychologically in the mind of your students, elementary, 3rd, 4th grade, that sensei mo eigo shaberu koto wa dekiru ja. It's a motivation. I would require that. Do not run away when the ALTs conduct the class. So we give seminars, we do role playing, we give them games, originally created kinds of activity, katsudo, for them to apply. And the idea is, many of you have suggested, they got to have fun, they got to be enthusiastic, they got to be rewarded, they've got to be encouraged, and at the end of the day. So you heard from my introduction, I don't consider myself an English teacher. I'm a developer of curriculum, and I'm an owner of a language school. So from a business standpoint, as an entrepreneur, you may think something about my approach here, but I shared it with Nikki and Michael. For my elementary students, particularly little girls, because they all like to interact together. It's fun. This is a cultural thing. So I said, okay, you're going to learn how to introduce yourself. And we're going to study this over a 6-week period. And it's going to be rote memorization, because I know you're used to that method. And the idea is that I'm going to have a hapyo, so that your mama and your daddy can see you speak with sensei by Jiko Shokai. Where are you from? I'm from Kakegawa City, Shizuoka Prefecture, Japan. What time do you get up? I get up at 8 o'clock. Turn the question around. And so it was a drill. And they became so confident because of that rote memorization for the purpose of, from a business standpoint, performing before mama and daddy. And mama goes, oh, I don't say. They were so happy that their kids could speak English, and the kids were more motivated than some of them now are in college abroad because of that experience. I instilled confidence in them and a desire to learn more through that method. And that's from a Gaigo Gajin point of view. It didn't have anything with their own particular culture, but there are methods, there are ways to flip the script for them, so to speak. I just wanted to interject that at that point, Doctor. So any further comments, Doc?
Let's see.
Michael's got a question. I'll call on you next. Go ahead. Go ahead, Doctor.
Oh,
Final comments. Well,
let's see. I jot down the notes, but
okay, what are you thinking? Let me go to Nikki because he's been very patient and very quiet. Here's a fellow. Who's a fellow I met 40 years ago, and I know a lot about his study abroad, his experience. Describe, Nikki, what motivated you to go to the U.S. to pursue your higher education in English and other disciplines, and then talk about two things that we've discussed: coming back to Japan and not being, maybe even being discriminated against because you're not a native speaker in your corporate classes, and you know, being passed on, where you may be educated as a better teacher than some so-called native speaker who comes over here, takes a contract, and within 6 months they're gone to Thailand or something like that. I used to consult for these Eikaiwa schools to help manage staff. So those are, what has been your experience with regard to those 2 points?
Okay. Well, okay. Let me see. Well, as a teacher, okay, how do I say it? It's not that easy.
First, give us your background about studying abroad. Where did you go? You went to university.
Yeah, I went to graduate school in Texas, University of Dallas, and to major in MBA, Master Business Administration, and decided that I didn't like it so much because the class was like dependent on discussion. So who are more talkative will get higher grade. And my English wasn't that good, so I stayed quiet, and then my grade wasn't that good. But I had my ideas about the topic that was discussed in class. Then I decided to change my school to engineering. That was my major in my undergraduate. So I transferred to another school. That was my first thing. Okay, what else?
So when you came, let's just jump. When you came back to Japan, when we first met in like 1980, you were involved in teaching at different levels, elementary and corporate classes as well. But you mentioned you felt some kind of way about not being a native English speaker, and there was some discrimination in your employment along the line. Speak to that, please.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This okay. To say it very clearly, I was reluctant choice, meaning that I speak English fine, but because of the way I look Japanese. Then the employers, their preference was so-called native English speakers, and then my choice was reluctant choice.
Can you elaborate on what does a typical native English speaker look like in the view of your employers, if I might ask?
Well, if I'm allowed to say it, white person, white man, white women.
I'll say it for you if you're reluctant. I've had the same discrimination.
He's already said it. He's already spelled it.
The choice number one is a white women. Number two, white men. Yeah, the important is the look. Not the way you speak English. It's the way how you look. It's more important than anything else. Which is again discrimination against white people because we hire you because you're white. We hire you. We don't hire you because of your language skill. Well, we don't hire you for your skill to teach English. We hire you because of the way you look. It's, again, discrimination against white people. That's my position. But they were given the first choice, priority. Me, no. At the bottom of the totem pole, that's my expression. Employment totem pole. Yeah, I was at the bottom. Yeah.
I don't know. I think you got some company. You're not alone.
Mike, let me come.
Japanese Americans face the same problem too.
Okay.
Say again, Dr.
Namiko-san, そうじゃないな。顔見たら、やっぱり、sorry.
Just a moment, please. Just a moment, please. Doctor, I couldn't hear what you were saying. Go ahead.
No, I said the same problem that he had. Japanese Americans had the same problem. They didn't American.
Sure.
When I was at the International Christian University, I went around with my resume and I thought, you know, I had a Fulbright and I thought I had a rather impressive resume, and you know, I got that, don't call us, we'll call you. But I think that's sort of, well, I was way back, ancient history, 1960s. So,
let me add this.
Changed.
Let me add this from my personal experience as a broadcaster. I came here with CBS News, appeared on TV and radio around the world, particularly in the United States. But many of us at the Foreign Correspondents Club could get part-time jobs or arbeito from NHK, the national broadcast, in English. But for 20 years, until I developed CNN Tokyo, they deferred to BBC reporters only because they spoke British English and they were white. They had the complexion for the connection, as we say. Until CNN came and I had the biggest microphone in Tokyo because we're the first 24-hour cable channel. All of a sudden, I'm getting hired to do the Japanese multiplex channel. You remember the machine? You twist over and hear my voice simultaneous to the evening broadcast of the Japanese version. You could get my English broadcast. I said, what was the problem with my pronunciation and my, before? I don't speak British English. I'm not white. Now all of a sudden I can get a job. So I made a point about showing that discrepancy, and it still exists to this day to some extent in the broadcast business, right?
Well, even in the States, they hire Canadians, so it's not much different.
Right, exactly. Michael, let me come to you about that because we talked about the diversity of your campus, of your the demographics of your university. And also, Doctor, you taught did you teach in Sri Lanka as well?
No, I was a student in Sri Lanka.
Okay. Well, Michael, this applies to you then. You told me before in our previous discussions, you get English speakers from Taiwan, Sri Lanka, India, and all of this. How does that come into play in terms of their acceptance or lack thereof?
Their acceptance of, what do you mean?
Well, among the administrators, or perhaps in terms of particularly in your English classes, was there any particular impact, negative?
No, I don't recall any specific negative impact because our school is primarily tuition funded, and so if the student paid, that was basically all they wanted. What I wanted to go back to what Nikki was saying about, and Reggie brought up about the government is saying one thing but doing another. When they say English is important, but they really don't do anything about it. That reminds me of the quote by Einstein saying, "We humans, we keep doing the same thing, expecting a different outcome, and that ain't going to happen."
Insanity.
So, for example, the Japanese government restricts on regular television. They restrict the number of hours that English can be broadcast, and that's been the case. You might probably know about this, Mal. The number of hours is restricted, and that goes against the whole grain of exposure, as Kathy talked about, a comfortable environment, for example. So, for example, when I was in South Korea teaching as a Peace Corps volunteer, the Armed Forces Network, their radio and their TV was open to everyone. And so Koreans could listen and watch and hear these things. The same in the Philippines as well. English is widely spoken, widely exposure. And so when you have that exposure, you feel comfortable with it.
Broadcast free over the public airwaves. Require no application of like cable does now. Nikki can attest to the fact that many Japanese learn to speak English from the Far Eastern Network here in Tokyo, right? Mm-hmm. Just by listening. A lot of the bilingual announcers on Japanese TV acquire the language that way, free of charge. Sorry to interrupt, but go ahead.
And the other thing I wanted to say to Nikki, Minister of Digital Affairs Taro Kono gave the keynote graduation address at Temple's graduation last year. And he said something that was very interesting. He said when he went off to Georgetown University, and he was in one of those classes where discussion was very, very important. And he said to the teacher, "I'm sorry, my English is not so good." And the teacher said, "That's your problem." After that, he said, "I knew I got to speak up in class. I got to be involved in the discussion, and don't care about my pronunciation or making a grammar mistake. I just got to dive in there and get to it." And I thought that was a very interesting thing that he shared with the graduates, saying, when you go out into the world, don't let your inhibitions hold you back. Get in there and go for it.
And that's another thing. Young Japanese students have to be impressed with the fact that everybody makes mistakes. I tell every class, I said, native speakers make mistakes.
Absolutely.
I make mistakes.
Absolutely.
And that is a reality. But and when I was at Kandagaigo Daigaku, one of my colleagues came in, and she was new to Japan, and she came from class one day, and she said, "Reg, I don't know if the students understand a word I'm saying. They just sit there. There's no expression on their face." And I told you about this, but I had a class where in every class I would ask, "You have questions or comments?" And this young lady raised her hand about that much. Then the next time it was like that. And then when she did this, other hands started going up. We had a great class.
Right. Yeah. Right. Great.
Can
Michael.
Excuse me.
Yes, please, Queenie.
Can I butt in, right? You are all very eloquent in explaining what's the problem, or why is it that English is so slow in Japan or in other countries, that it is a second language. Well, I have that experience very much. I don't, honestly, not really honest, but I don't like English at first during my time. In my generation, it's so hard. You have to be grammatically correct or something like that. Just like Namiko said, grammar should be the last part, because you will lose interest. And I agree. I hate grammar. And now in Japan, they are introducing phonetics, and which is, I didn't learn that when I was in my school. That was how many years ago? That was 50 or 60 years ago. And so I think of what Michael says, time is really limited. And it's only once a week for English to be in school, especially in elementary school. Did any one of you teach 20 minutes once a week for a class in elementary school? Have you done that? Oh, nobody's answering. Anybody?
No, only Nenshu.
Have you?
Kindergarten 20
No,
minutes.
not in kindergarten.
Yeah.
In elementary school.
No.
No, but
Yuko.
we were forced to teach. And then
I've
what I
done-
like about Namiko, what Namiko said, interest is very good because you learned it from your experience. And I like that. I don't have that because I have a lot of things to do here in Japan before I learn how to speak Japanese, right? And now Nikki said he's shy. But you're not shy. I think you're just nervous. Pride, take that out. Okay, anyway, I like Kathy Bauer's explanation of everything. It summed up everything. And I think we should do that. And the last part about what Malcolm said, you should introduce this to the government or wherever you are. Maybe they will listen and they will have an idea of what to do about this. But this video lacks the how. I only hear the why. So maybe we can add that next time if we have time.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. I'm gonna go to Yuko now, please, for your comment. You were delayed, please. Thank you very much.
I've done a 20-minute lesson in elementary school for 1 year. The program was very short, and we had only 20 sessions, I guess. And what I did was reading a storybook and singing songs. That was enough for 20 minutes. And after the class, students, the age of the students were grade 3 and grade 4. And I had 4 classes. And I knew that only 20 minutes, I couldn't do anything much. But what I chose was a storybook and read the storybook again and again. Very simple storybook like Brown Bear, or Very Hungry Caterpillar, and very simple songs. And the students seemed to enjoy the class. And some of the students even went to a conversation school called ECC. It's very disappointing to me, but the teachers liked my lesson and they learned a lot. I still have their comments, gratitude notes to me. And it was a very interesting experience because my class is usually once a week and for 60 minutes or longer. But what I learned from that was so many students, in 36 or 37 students in one class, and to do the kind of activity. And I think even elementary school can do that kind of thing if you can focus on listening and singing or action songs. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment. I appreciate it. We're going to wrap up soon here, but I'd like to ask Professor Williams. We touched on this in previous discussions, but I think that it would be important to include it here since this is where we are in this time frame of learning, the use of technology. As you know, in recent years, technology has played an increasingly important role in English language teaching in Japan. And this includes the use of online resources, multimedia tools, and language learning apps, which can provide opportunities for cross-cultural exchange and collaboration I would like you, Michael, to address, although we didn't include it in the talking points per se, but exchanges that you and I have had at the university level, your students who are, prioritizing the use of this technology to teach, and any problems that may cause you as a teacher. I'm going to refer to the story you told me, so I'll let you tell it without, infringing on anybody's rights. But there was a particular student who produced a document that they didn't produce, and technology may have had a role to play in that. Share that story in the last few minutes that we have, please.
Yeah, yes, there are a number of companies around the world, particularly in China, where people offer their services to translate things into English for students, papers, application letters, for example, for graduate school. And some of these companies guarantee the customer that they will not be caught as being plagiarized or so forth. And so this was what happened to this particular student. It was a contest, actually, since we're in Black History Month. And actually, it was also part of the Martin Luther King Jr. Day holiday in the USA. So our university sponsored a contest where students could submit things to be judged by US Embassy personnel. It could be a essay, it could be a photograph, it could be a sketch, anything that they felt that symbolized the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. So this particular student submitted an essay, and the embassy staff who judged it to be the best prize, the top prize, grand prize winner. And someone looked at it and thought, wow, this is really good. And so since the student was in my course, one of my courses, they asked me to look at it. And I took a look at it and I thought immediately, that student did not write this. I know that student did not write this. And so it caused a little issue because we didn't want to go back to the embassy and say, well, we know that this student didn't write this. And so we just let it fly. But those are the kinds of things, when we go back to technology now, teaching online, it poses a problem. Students will type out their responses or get them translated. They got these things out there will translate, and they try to copy and paste into a text box. And I tell them, don't do that, because I will know. The reason you know is that if you take something out of from another document and you put it into the text box, the font changes. You didn't type it there. You brought it out from somewhere else. So these kinds of things we have to be aware of. And more recently in the news is this new artificial intelligence application that's now being discussed, and schools are discussing how we're going to deal with it.
GPT, right? Specifically.
Yeah, GPT, yeah.
I'm a journalist. I've used it, I admit, but I've rewrote. The 3 hours it would take me to do a piece, I got in 12 seconds by devising a nice prompt that gave it to me, and I was done in an hour. I just had it can be used effectively and ethically.
It's kind of like
ethically, maybe not.
Go ahead.
In academia, that's plagiarism.
Yeah, it's also in journalism, right? But if you don't rewrite it,
and you can be kicked out of a university. Matter of fact, I forget the historian's name, but he discovered that Martin Luther King Jr. had plagiarized part of his dissertation.
Well,
and Boston University had to consider whether or not to revoke his doctorate. So,
in journalism, I started as a pro at the age of 19. One of the first lessons I learned, they would say, Mal, in broadcast journalism, God gave us eyes to plagiarize. That was a rule. Because my job, unlike a print journalist, who really have to write and compose. But I do my research. We have in the newsroom, there's a wire service. Associated Press, UPI has given us the story. My job is to condense it, recompose it to fit the time, the minute and 30 seconds that I got to do it. So that was my job. I was a rewriter, you know what I'm saying? But it was no original thoughts.
That's different.
Yeah, that's what
I don't think you need to
Academia.
defend yourself so much there, Mal. I think you're okay. I think the issue is in the
I'm
class.
sure I'm okay. I know.
It's really not so much about whether or not it's an ethical issue for yourself, but for the new generation of people that are going to be using those kinds of tools, and whether or not it's going to help them academically in the future. So if you rely too heavily on AI and all of these different technologies, are they going to be able to reproduce that level of
Absolutely.
material independently without it?
Right,
So that's
right.
the question.
And that really leads up to my final point, Michael, if I may. The second part of what I was asking was to talk about the ethics of learning that we talked about, and you really didn't get a chance to get into that. Did we not discuss one of your courses entitled The Ethics of Learning?
The politics of identity in America.
Okay. Speak to that.
In that course, and I wanted to ask Namiko a question. You were talking about when you went to the U.S. as a young child, and you were thrown into this environment where English is spoken all around you, or English is spoken all around you. I wondered, did you have any issues with being bullied because of your pronunciation of English or anything like that?
I was really lucky because we were the only family that came from Japan. We were treated very differently. And because maybe I entered as a first grader, soon after I attended like a month of kindergarten in the States. Everyone just kind of looked at me as someone from like, not outer space, but from a different world. And they really embraced Japanese culture like once a month. I think the teacher was great. The first grade teacher was wonderful. And she made it a point to kind of like have me do presentations that didn't require language. And so I'm a firm believer in that too. Like, most of communication actually doesn't involve verbal more so than nonverbal cues. And I learned that as a child myself. And so with music and nonverbal communication, I knew that I could communicate without the language. But when you get older and you start, especially like I think I mentioned this in another podcast, but when you start learning about the history of America, or when you start learning about, world history, that's when World War II comes up. And then I myself was surprised because I only saw two sentences. And it was basically Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and then, the US dropped 2 bombs, without understanding that actually my family has a very deep history with World War II, because my maternal grandmother actually lost 2 of her brothers with the bombing of Nagasaki. So that part of me, I understood that day when I went home. So without that history book and without those 2 sentences and without that kid in elementary school saying, "Hey, why did you do that to our country?" Without that, I wouldn't have been able to go home and then have that 3-4 hour talk with my parents, because we don't even talk about it here with our relatives. It's something that's unspoken of. And then later, when you learn more about American history, you'll learn about the internment camps with the Japanese Americans, and then those who also served in the war. All of those things make you understand that, especially in the States, individuality, personal freedom, self-expression, being able to say what you mean and to protest and to advocate for human rights, that requires language. And that I want to empower my students with in Japan, regardless if it's English, if it's Japanese, but I want to give them that voice, because that's what the States gave me. with my second, well, with my first language now, but I can use Japanese to also empower that way too. And then I do speak other languages too. So I think it really does help. The more languages you learn, maybe their starting point is English because English is an international language, but there are other languages that will also help you and that will open the doors. And so, yeah, discrimination wasn't really, I didn't experience that until I came back. It was the reverse culture shock. It was the stories that Nikki talks about. I just encountered it a couple days ago, even though I got the job, because they were like, prove your nativeness. And as Kathy said, well, what is nativeness? And then I said that too. I said, please, I said, I'm sorry to say this, but I said, you asked me to come into this interview. Please tell me in this day in this day and age, when we're talking about native speakerism and we're talking about world Englishes, what part of nativeness do you need me to prove? And then that prove, that word is also very it triggers me because in the States, I was lost. I had no idea who I was because it was like a melting pot. Everyone wants you to be American, even though I wasn't. You know, I held my hand to my heart, pledged allegiance to a flag that wasn't my country. You know, that was the 80s. And then I come back here, experience the reverse discrimination, and I still do. I was asked to change my name, a business card with katakana, even though my parents gave me a name with kanji on it. But unless you go through those experiences and then you share those narratives, it's the same thing with African American history, right? The reason why people are adamant and we're saying like this cannot happen again is because there's people in those stories and there are many things that have happened in history that we can't take back, but we really need to make amends with. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's, I'm a bridge that way.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I just want to say it's also up to the school systems as well to
Definitely.
what they're going to. So, for example, I had, if I may, Mal, there was a conference, and we were talking about the case of Vincent Chin, and the presenters talked about Vincent Chin, who was a hate crime, who was murdered back in the 80s, 70s in Detroit, Michigan, and during the Q&A, one of the students at TEJ, a Japanese American exchange student, said that he didn't know anything about the Japanese internment during World War II, that they didn't teach it in the schools. And I was just flabbergasted that he would say something like that. And so after he posed his question, and I said, I have a comment to that young man. The first place to start is the website called Densho. It is full of many films and interviews and primary sources, letters and postcards, hundreds of thousands of items. There you get a good start on your own if the school system is not going to present something that is as major as that in American history. It is completely not taught. And that's happening now across the US in other things such as African American history in Florida is going on with the governor there trying to dictate what can and cannot be taught.
Absolutely.
It is really, to bring this back to the Japanese government, governments should not be too involved with what is going on into the classroom because they are not teachers, they are politicians. With that, I yield.
And with that, we're going to let that hang for a moment because as a journalist, that's breaking news right there. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you for this opportunity to participate with ETJ, particularly the East Tokyo branch of that organization. And I'd like to thank all of our viewers on the Global News Network from all over the world in Japan on our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel, Malcolm W. Adams YouTube. You can find us there. And when you do, please don't hesitate to click that like button, subscribe, share, and leave a comment on this programming as we try to bring to you the days in the life of us expats here in Japan on Japan Journal, the internet's #1 weekly English language online cybercast from Japan with yours truly, Mal Adams, as your host. And thank you very much. We'll end the program here, and I'll turn the microphone back over to my sponsor and collaborator, Mr. Nikki Sekino.
So far, we have talked about what's happening. And then maybe I have a feeling that we need it's not like we need another session to talk about what may happen in the future, or how, or what we are going to do. We means a teacher of English can do, should do. Maybe we need another session to talk about it. Yeah.
I'd love to collaborate with you again in the future.
Right. Yeah. Some specific issues. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. I'm going to cut it off here. I'd like to thank Nikki for your invitation to participate. Yuko-san, congratulations to you on your service for this organization. It was a pleasure meeting you. Hope to talk to you all. Mike Williams, appreciate you, my brother. And my new friend, Educator Bauer, as I've coined you for this particular program. You'll be back on this show for sure. And Dr. Kearney, it's always a pleasure. Let's have a follow-up exchange after we end this show. And to Queenie, what's your other name, Queenie?
My other name?
Your full name.
Oh, my name is a longer one. That's why I put it in Queenie.
Okay, make it short.
My real name is Maria Regina Jimena Regalado Mihara. I am married to a Japanese, and I stayed here in Japan for 35 years. And I'm very glad I've seen some new faces here and quite informative, though I'm not teaching anymore.
Okay,
Anyway.
thank you very much. And then Namiko.
Yes, lovely to see all of you. Thank you
very
so
much. Unexpected surprise having your participation. I really appreciate it.
I need to get your contact.
Yes. Kathy, are you on LinkedIn?
What?
Are you
LinkedIn,
on LinkedIn? Okay, I will find you. And by the way, Professor Williams, I audit all the SLA classes at Temple University. So my knowledge comes from your institution. So I'm a big fan of your SLA department. So thank you very much.
That's great. Great. Okay, Nikki, thank you. I'm gonna end it. I'm gonna stop this recording, and you all can get in where you fit in. But I'll be back in touch with each of you to thank you personally for your participation. Nikki, thank you very much. And everybody can sign off here, and we'll do it again, hopefully.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. All right.
See you guys. Yeah.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Sayonara.
Bye. Otsukare nama. Otsukare nama deshita.
Kathy, get in touch with Namiko.
Yes, Kathy Bauer. Yeah.
Nice to see you again.
Okay.
Namiko.
You're tuned to GNN, the Global News Network, a division of Towtown Communications Company Limited. Towtown presents Japan Journal. Japan Journal with Mal Adams, the internet's #1 English language weekly online cybercast from Japan. From GNN, the Global News Network, a division of Towtown Communications Company Japan. Japan Journal. With Mal Adams. A Black Buddha Productions joint of Japan.